Welcome all. We're so happy to have another practice, not practice, another Zoom presentation. We did one, what have we done? One or two last year. And we're really happy to have Louise here to talk to us about whatever she wants to talk to us about. But I asked her, I was at a meeting with some gardeners who were doing volunteer work at Prairie Ridge, and we were talking about cutting all the stems back in the winter and all that. And I said, I'm not sure this is the time to do it. Maybe there's some other reason why we garden other than just for our own sake and our own sense of beauty. I remember entomologists and friends saying, oh, there's some little bee that likes this plant that I was pulling up. So I think that's one of the reasons Louise has got the topic she's got, as I inflicted it upon her, but I'm curious to hear what you have to say. I think you all saw Louise's introduction in the chat, but so anyway, Louise, as she's told me, she's always been interested in plants and nature, and she also studied entomology. So I think we got the perfect speaker. She's a master gardener volunteer, and I think right now in the middle of preparing all kinds, well, I guess you've already prepared all kinds of presentations to start the next crop of master gardeners. So I really appreciate you adding this to your calendar this month. And she, aside from the things she mentioned here, she even sometimes comes and volunteers at the Reid Garden, which we greatly appreciate. And she has an absolutely beautiful garden that I once got a chance to see, which is lovely. So, and with a big deer fence, but full of things. So I'm not going to read this whole thing. I think we've hit the high points. I'm going to let Louise start talking because she's going to be more coherent than I am. So okay. Thanks, Louise. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, I hope it works. Oh, you know what? I do have a note that says host disabled participant screen sharing. So you're right, Margaret, you do have to let me share. Make me a co-host or whatever it takes. Okay, now I can do it. Okay, got it. Okay, can you all see this? Can you see my presentation, Amy?
Yes.
Sorry,
yes.
I had to unmute. Yes.
Okay, good.
We can see.
Okay, so as Amy said in her preface, this was really started, the germ of the idea was hers. And my gardens kind of look like hell every winter. There's a reason for it. And I guess it was Dave Steffen who said to you, leave those stems. Anyway, I am, although trained in controlling insects and diseases and all, I try to do as little intervention as I can. And I think we're all concerned about decline of insect populations all around the world. I mean, this may be a disaster in the making, and I think we all want to think about ways that we might be able to improve or preserve habitat for insects. So that's kind of what this talk is based on. Now, I have to tell you that I am an entomologist, so this is going to be very heavy on bugs. So let me see if I can move forward. Okay. So, you know, we think of insects as pests, but in fact, almost all the insects are beneficial. And of course, even those that we think of as pests are beneficial to somebody else. I mean, the mosquitoes are eaten by the bats, and the caterpillars are eaten by the birds. But even from our point of view, you know, pollination is very important, not just for the plants that we enjoy in our garden, but for a lot of commercial production of fruits and vegetables. So we know, of course, of moths and butterflies and bees, but beetles and flies, ants, even a lot of wasps are good pollinators and important, and some of them are specific to certain plants. Most pollinators are generalists. And there are also insects that are predators. Another group of beneficials, of course, there are the wasps, and some of them are predatory, some of them are parasitoids, which means that they basically feed on a living organism. Ants are really important predators, lacewings and other neuropterans, beetles, bugs, although a lot of bugs are pests. There are also whole families of bugs that are predaceous. There's the praying mantis and its relatives are also, and then we have the non-insects that are also really good, important predators, and those are, for example, centipedes and spiders. Let's see if I can go on to the next one here. I don't know why it's doing this. Okay, so this is my garden. I had taken a couple weeks ago, and I have to say that this oak leaf hydrangea does not look so good after the recent cold, but and you can see that here behind this Algerian iris, there are these scraggly things which are Joe Pye weed. I have Joe Pye weed in a number of places, and it all looks like this. And you can also, oops, now I did it when I didn't mean to do it. Let's see if I can go backwards. And you'll also see that there's a, this is a woodland garden, and the only places that get raked are paths and the driveway. All the leaves stay on the ground, and there are a number of reasons to leave the leaves on the ground. First of all, there are a lot of insects that overwinter, either in leaves, in leaf litter, or slightly below the surface. If you keep your leaves on the ground, it does help to provide a buffer for cold. So it does improve their overwintering sites. And even although we don't think about it, it provides overwintering sites for a lot of leps. Most of them are overwintering as pupae, and birds and a number of predaceous insects are out there looking for these guys, and they're chowing down on them. So it's important to eat, you know, in the winter too. So it's an added benefit. And of course, we all know that it not only does it improve the soil, but it retains moisture and keeps down weeds. So bees, you know, we think about bees, and a lot of people think about bees and they think about honeybees, which are in fact imported. There are 558 known species in North Carolina, which is pretty staggering when you think of it. And only one of them is eusocial, and that is the honeybee. And eusocial insects have a reproductive division of labor. The queen looks different from the workers. They have overlapping generations, and they cooperate and care. The catch with the honeybee, although you know you get a lot of information about how wonderful honeybees are and how important they are terrible pollinators. They are after the nectar, and so your pollinators really are much, the other bee species that are around are much better pollinators than honeybees. And I know that apiaries don't like to hear that, but it is true. So we have another 555 species of native bees in North Carolina. There are a few, you notice it doesn't come to 558. There are a few other imports. Of those, about 200 species nest in groups in the ground. So the more we don't disturb the ground, the better it is. Bumblebees, there are 15 species of bumblebees, and they are primitively eusocial, which means that unlike honeybees, they all look the same, but the workers help raise the colony of their sisters. And and the sweat bees, which are oftentimes these pretty little metallic jobs. There are a number of species of them. Also, a lot of them overwinter in the ground and nest in the ground. Again, these are primitively social, so they do a thing where they share a common entryway into a series of nests, and each individual queen will have her own nest where she's raising her young, but they do joint guard duty, which is very efficient. They don't have to all be on guard all the time. Then there are the colonial bees. They're the mining bees and the leafcutter bees, and these are the ones that if people have really sparse lawns and they're not watering and stuff, these bees tend to be colonial. So they will be individual nests all in a cluster. So you'll have a whole big bunch of them. People get really freaked, but in fact, these are not stinging bees. So, you know, we can just relax about them. Now, this is a picture of a bumblebee, a mated female, and she, even though she is, will have a substantial colony during the warm weather, she is on her own during the winter, and she nests just 5 to 15 centimeters below the ground surface. So it is really, the leaving leaves helps to protect her from the vagaries of the weather. So we have 70% of our native bees actually nest in the ground, including a lot of solitary bee species. Also nesting in the ground are, I'm sorry, I skipped a bit, hold on here. So most of the native bee species are in fact solitary. Some of them are parasitic, which means that they go into the nest of another bee species and they just sort of lay their eggs, and they get the workers in that nest to take care of their offspring, kind of like cuckoo birds, European cuckoos, because our cuckoos don't do that. Ants are eusocial, that is that they have this complicated structure of their society. There are 192 species in North Carolina. We think of them as pests, but in fact, they most of them are really, they are consuming a wide range of stuff. A lot of them are predatory. Some of them eat seeds and grain, and some of them concentrate on nectar and honeydew. And this is a carpenter bee here who is a nurse to a bunch of aphids. They will still live in the ground. This is a kind of a complicated, pretty neat situation. They collect, they tap with their antennae on the aphids. The aphids produce honeydew. They collect it. They bring it down to the ground. They give the honeydew to a fungal colony, and they eat the fungi. So they're underground. And in fact, we consider carpenter bees pests, but they're really only indicators of a problem. That is that carpenter bees don't eat wood. Carpenter bees eat the fungus that's growing on the wood, and the wood has the fungus because the wood is wet. So if you have carpenter ants, you need to start looking at why you have carpenter ants and figure that you need to address the issue, not of the ants, but of the moisture. But these guys are, a lot of them are predaceous, and they do a lot of work sort of keeping our ground in good shape. Also in the ground are a number of wasps, are paper wasps that we know of, and they are colonial, and they are eusocial. They overwinter just as single individuals, and then they come out, and they are mostly pollen eaters, and so are thus pollinators. Some of the wasps, a number of wasps are solitary and predatory. This is the flower wasp scoliids, and you see them on your gardens because the adults will be feeding on nectar, but they will burrow into the ground and find beetle grubs and lay an egg on, paralyze the beetle grub, lay an egg on it, and then the egg will eat the beetle grub as it develops. So, this is another good one that we only see it, as an adult for a short time in the year, but it's, it's helping to control Japanese beetles, June beetles.
You give bedroom advice to Carrie, Samantha, Charlotte, and Miranda. Hey, what's Masters of Sex in the City? You got it. Before and after TV 2000.
I think somebody needs to silence themselves.
HP's works with.
Okay. Also overwintering ground are the thread-waisted wasps, and these are the mud daubers that we see. Also, some of them are construct nests in plant stems or abandoned bee nests. We see them as adults, but they're in the ground for a good part of the year, and protecting that ground is really important to maintaining their populations. And of course, then we have ground beetles. Carabids are very important predators, and they also, interestingly enough, are major seed eaters. So one of the recommendations that's now coming out in Eastern North Carolina in agriculture is to not till until as late as you can go in the spring, because these fellows are actually reducing your weed seed population. So you'll have fewer weeds if you can let the carabids go, which I found quite interesting. So then we have bees that overwinter and some wasps that overwinter in hollow stalks of perennial plants in that pithy center. And this is the trigger for this whole talk. So in fact, these dead stalks, although it's so tempting to clean up everything, it's better to leave them. The flower heads provide seed for some birds during the winter. This came out of Xerces Society. If you're not familiar with them, they have a great website with a lot of interesting information. I will give you more references on that at the end of the talk. But so what they're so they sort of step you through how you should be taking care of your plants. You leave your flower heads. In the spring, you cut your flower heads because it's the open stalks that let the bees lay their nests, lay their eggs. So they will provision the nest with a ball of pollen and a little bit of nectar, lay a seed, and then put in a division and then do it up and up. Those individuals will mature eating the pollen that was left for them during the summer, and meanwhile your plant will flower. In the winter, and then you see in the fall, you've left your next batch of flower stems up there. So you've got the cut off ones and the good ones. In the winter, these individuals are pupating and developing into adults. Some of them pupate some of them overwinter as pupae, some of them overwinter as adults. And then in the spring, they all emerge. And at that point, you're supposed to cut down the stems of your last batch of flowers. Now you can go in and cut back the old ones too, but my experience is that by the time you get through 2 years, if you can even find those stems, they tend to be all busted up. I've never gone through and removed that first batch of stems, but you could. So some of the bees that do this are the small carpenter bees. These are really tiny. And here you see on the right, this is goldenrod, and you can see how small this bee is inside the stem of this goldenrod. And they're, again, kind of metallic. They're quite pretty. And they will actually, when they come out of a stem, they may actually use the same stem again the next year. So it means that you could have a very woody looking landscape. Also, a lot of people do a lot of pruning in the fall. It turns out there's been some research that's come out of NC State saying that it's really not a very good idea to prune in the fall. There are a couple things that happen. One is if you prune just before you get real cold, pruning stimulates growth. So you wind up with a lot of new growth that gets nailed. If you prune in the winter when your plants are dormant, the problem is that the plant has so little vascular activity that it doesn't heal well. So on top of the benefit to the plant, you also have the benefit to a lot of insects because they're going to be hiding in the bark, also hide in dead trees if you can stand it and have dead trees standing in your on your property. It's a bonanza for the birds. They will feed on a lot of insects that are in there. So many moth larvae and pupae will be under the barks of trees. Stink bugs will be. Now, interestingly, the brown marmorated stink bug has become pretty noticeable around here in the last few years. This is an import from Asia, and it cannot take our winter temperatures. So it is not overwintering in the under the bark of trees. It's trying to get into your house because it needs warmer temperatures in order to overwinter. But a lot of leaf hoppers are there. Some of the aphids are there. And of course, southern bark beetles may well be in some dying trees. And that's all bird food. Carpenter bees will also nest in branches, and of course they will nest in your house as well. They don't actually eat the wood. They simply make galleries in which they can provision with pollen, put in an egg, put in a barrier, put in a pollen, an egg, a barrier, and this and that. So if you can stand it, carpenter bees are actually good pollinators. If you can stand what they're damaging. And I did want to point out that you can, whoa, I did it again. Hold on. One of the ways you can tell the difference between a carpenter bee and a bumblebee is that carpenter bees, their abdomen is shiny, whereas a bumblebee, their abdomen is fuzzy. So if you have a shiny one, it's a carpenter bee. Another thing you don't want to be cleaning up is spider webs out in the woods. In the late summer or fall, spiders are doing their swan song, and they are putting out threads of silk between branches, and they will produce these egg sacs, which they'll leave hanging down. And I apologize for this picture. It was very hard to convince my camera to focus on the egg sac and not the magnolia behind it. But if you see these strings with these egg sacs, leave them, because this is just another predator that's going to be around in the spring. Lawns. I am not a fan of lawns, and lawns are not native to this area. So if you have a lawn, I would really recommend a couple things. First is reduce the size of it. If you can, Second is get away from monoculture. I mean, these perfect lawns that are watered and fertilized and all are not particularly conducive to insects. A lot of ground nesting bees will nest in lousy lawns where the areas are bare. They're colonial, so they will nest. You'll see a whole mess of these guys, girls, I should say, all nesting together of one species. They do not sting. They are pollinators. So, you know, if you can stand it, let them be. Another thing about lawns is that I think in response to consumer pressure, NC State has begun suggesting that you can plant a lawn that is a microclover fescue mix. This is good for pollinators because you're providing something besides grass out there, something for the insects to eat, collect nectar and pollen from. Also, if you are going to cut your lawn, delay in the spring as long as you can, because a lot of these insects are coming up in the spring, and letting your lawn be is better for the bees. And also flowering weeds, you know, people don't like them. They want that monoculture, but in fact, all those weeds are benefiting the pollinators. Finally, I want to mention that water is important. It's really important for honeybees, because they use it for cooling their hives, but it's also important for a lot of other insects, as well as the birds and the other animals around. And I would also like to caution you about using pesticides. The systemic pesticides, you know, they say, well, don't use it on a plant if it's flowering. Well, the fact is, and we're talking about neonicotinoids and other systemics, the fact is that you put on a systemic and it's good for 6 months. So you may put it on before your plant is flowering, but by the time it's flowering, that poison is still in the flowers. So I would say if you can avoid it, you know, Bacillus thuringiensis targets caterpillars, or you can also use it in a mosquito dung. It's a different strain of Bacillus thuringiensis. But most insecticides are general. They do not distinguish between good guys and bad guys. And so if you're using a pesticide, you're going to be reducing your overall pest population in your yard. So if you ever hope to have predators help to control your pests, it's best not to use the pesticides. Also, there's some recent work that says that some fungicides may also be hard on insects. I don't think that this was known before. I think that people sort of figured that fungicides were specific to insects, but it seems that they may also be deleterious to insects as well. Here's some goldenrod that's looking really spectacular right now in my yard. I would really recommend that you leave your yard looking kind of rough. The agrimony is actually courtesy of Amy, and you can see it does have a little bit of basil rosette there, but there's the plant on the right, but the stems of last year's flowering part are still hanging in there, and I'll cut them back when the weather warms, and hope I encourage bees and wasps to be in there. Finally, I wanted to mention some references that you might like. I mentioned Xerces Society, that nesting and overwintering habitat is a brochure. It's a PDF file that you can download from their site. It has a lot of information about preserving habitat for bees. They basically are interested in pollinators, mostly bees. They do have brochures on pollinator plants for different regions of the country. There is one for the Mid-Atlantic. There's also one for the Southeast, which could be very helpful if you're choosing plants. Another thing I would recommend, and I don't know if any of you can see me in the corner, but there's this book, Good Garden Bugs. It's about predaceous bugs in your garden. It has a lot of great pictures to help you identify what are the good guys. She also spends some time talking about lady beetles. You know, a lot of people buy ladybugs to put into their garden, figuring they're going to control their aphids. And the problem is that what's being sold are Asian ladybugs. And these beetles are really voracious, and they will eat everything, including our native ladybugs. On top of which, when you put them out in an area where you have aphids, they'll stay there for 15 minutes and then they'll say, yeah, I think I can go someplace else. And they're gone. So you're not really introducing insects unless you're in a greenhouse where the system is closed, is not going to be a particularly good way of controlling your pests. Then I mentioned the work on ground beetles and delaying tilling that's referenced in this NCSU bulletin. And this article from Smithsonian talks about how migratory birds really are depending upon those bugs that are in our trees. So that is it, folks. And I do see that there are a few questions, which I am happy to answer. Let me see if I can see the chat. Oh, yes. Oh, everyone, okay. How about squash bugs? Squash bugs are not predators. Squash bugs are eating squash. The predaceous bugs, though, can look a lot like squash bugs. They tend to have little pointy pronoda. The front of their thorax has little points on it. And of course, the wheel bug. The wheel bug is a plant bug, but the assassin bugs are predaceous. So and books like Mary Gardner's really do go through and tell you which of the bugs you might like to promote and which ones you don't want to promote. That said, unless you're really good at it, it could be hard to identify an egg mass as a good bug egg mass or a bad bug egg mass. Oh, and pine bark mulch. Okay, I did not talk on that, but the more you mulch, and you know, the word is that for your shrubs, you should be putting down between 2 and 4 inches of mulch around them. That much mulch is going to be hell on, on ground nesting bees. If you can, you know, I understand that especially if you're trying to get weeds under control, that you might want to be mulching, but keep it as light as you can. And if you can, use leaves. I mean, one of the things I do, I have somebody said, do you ever rake up your leaves and simply leave them to degrade? Absolutely. I have some spectacular piles just from my driveway and my paths. Now, one thing I have learned, which was absolutely serendipitous, was that if you want to use those leaves the next year, in mid-July or so, move that pile to another spot, because if you don't, by the time you get to when you want to use those leaves, all of the tree roots will have worked their way into it, and you will get very few leaves out of your leaf pile. But if you can move that mulch, and it, you know, it's a 10-minute job to move my pile of mulch from one spot to the next spot. It won't get the tree roots, and it's great stuff. I use it whenever I do planting. I always put leaf mold around it. So do we have more? Yeah, and I never understand why people collect their leaves and put them out on the street. I mean, this is, you know, this is gold. Pine needles. If you have healthy pine trees and your pine needles are, you know, and you're not getting a really heavy fall of pine needles, absolutely leave them. What's important for ground nesting bees is that they can make their way up through what's there on top of them. So if the pine needles are falling down or the leaves are falling down and it's a light layer, it is not a problem at all. If you're going to pack in 4 inches of pine needles every year, that may be a problem. Just like mulch. Okay, must the stems be hollow? You mentioned best beetles, I guess. Best beetles are munchers, but the bees really require hollow stems because what they're going into is that pithy center. You know, you've got that sturdy outside, and then you have that soft pith, and they'll go down through the pith. Now, that said, the carpenter bees will go into wood. But most of your stem nesting bees are not able to get into wood. Bees born to, oh yeah, okay. That's a good question, because I wanted to mention that bees don't care whether it's a native plant or not a native plant. If it's a nesting site, it's a nesting site. It's the same with pollen. You know, if it has good pollen, it has good pollen. You may not want that plant in your yard. I mean, you know, like butterfly bushes. Butterfly bushes are adored by a lot of people. Well, you have one butterfly bush and you'll have 40 butterfly bushes in a couple of years. But they are good for the pollinators, you know, if you want to keep them under control. All of the plants, anything that will produce a stem with pith in it is good. Some of your annuals will not have as good a pithy stem as your perennials. And I think you sort of have to look at it. My annuals, I have very few annuals, first of all. But the annuals that I have, when the cold hits, they turn to mush. So I'm not sure that it would work. Anything though where the stems are still standing after the plant has died, I think is a good contender. Oh, would I say more about mosquito dunks? I think mosquito dunks are very safe. They're really specific to mosquitoes. I mean, you can put them in where you have all kinds of other things living, and it will just work on the mosquitoes. Now the catch is you have to keep doing it because they do dissolve. But one of the ways people get into trouble with mosquitoes is that they have pots out with trays with standing water. And that's like mosquito heaven, because a lot of mosquitoes, especially tiger mosquitoes, will lay their eggs right at near the surface of the water, and then they get a little wet, and then they will the eggs will hatch, then the larvae will develop in the water. And tiger mosquitoes, for instance, only have about a 10-meter range. So if you can control the water in your saucers, you will also eliminate a lot of your tiger mosquito problems. Not necessarily all the mosquitoes. Some mosquitoes will travel a lot farther. But if you have a place where you think you are having mosquitoes breeding, you can use some mosquito dunks. I have a small recirculating fountain, and I keep mosquito dunks in there through the summer, and it seems to work. And sometimes I get frogs in there and they don't seem to mind. Let's see what else we have for questions. Are there signs to look for on the outsides of the stalk No, not really. I was out there just a couple days ago trying to look at my stalks and seeing who was. They don't bore through the stalk. They go down the stalk. So they really tend to enter from a hole at the top. So you probably won't see damage on the outside, indicating that the bees are inside. Oh, somebody says I can identify squash bug eggs. Okay, tell us about it. Chris, can you turn on your mic? Chris?
Yes, I can do that. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Okay, sure.
Yeah.
So squash bug eggs are like little bronze colored oblong eggs. They're in groups of probably at least 20, 30 little eggs usually. At least that's what I see on the squash plants in our community garden. And we try to get rid of them.
You know that ladybug eggs also look like little tiny sort of bronze footballs, and they're in masses.
Okay, that sounds a lot like these. I'm not so sure about these because I've seen them hatch.
Bug eggs are usually round. Bug eggs are usually entirely round. And lady beetle eggs will be more like little footballs, and they are also in masses. So I would look it up. You may be taking away your ladybug eggs. So just be careful. I've got some, let's see, I've got some more here. Tree roots even invade black plastic bags filled with weeds. Yeah, so I think that the moving the leaves midsummer to another spot is a great solution. You do have to use them. You've got about a 2-year window. You know, you collect them in the fall, you let them rot through that summer, the next year they're gold. If you wait too long, you're gonna have all those tree roots and they're not gonna be worth a damn. Bee houses. Bee houses, I think, make us feel good. And they're kind of pretty. I don't have any, and I am not sure that they're really worth the effort. You can get some bees in them, but they will also be very willing to find stuff out there in nature. If you haven't cleaned up the place too much, they should be fine. So I have a Doug Tallamy. Oh, Amy, Doug Tallamy recommends actually creating attractive breeding spots for mosquitoes and then adding dunks to kill them. Oh, that's an idea. So you let them, but the problem is in the heat of summer in North Carolina, and Doug Tallamy lives in the north, in the heat of summer, we have a 7-day window from egg to egg. So, you know, you create an attractive spot, and you're going to have mosquito larvae in there that are going to become adult larvae in a week. So it might work, but, you know, it's sort of like Japanese beetle traps. I mean, Japanese beetle traps, the word on Japanese beetle traps is you get somebody else far away from you to put it out, because you're going to attract Japanese beetles and the males will come to it, but the females don't come to it. And you can wind up with great populations of Japanese beetles. So I am, at least in our climate, I would be reluctant. Did everybody read Amy's note? The whole thing says, Doug Tallamy recommends putting some straw in a bucket of water and letting it ferment for a couple of days, and then adding dunks to kill the larvae. You could do that, but if you don't have any sight, then the mosquitoes aren't going to come there. I mean, you can simply not provide a site, and then they won't come. they're coming because you have a site. It's not as if you have them here, they'll go here, they're not gonna go there. I'm not sure it works as a magnet, but it's
I'm
an
wondering
interesting-
if just adding it to, like you said, we put it in the places they're coming to already, not creating a new site, but just putting your dunks in your pool or in your saucers and all that probably has the same
Yeah.
effect. But basically the idea being that dunks are a better way to control mosquitoes than the mosquito gel guys,
Yeah,
because you're
definitely.
killing them when they're larvae. So I think what you're saying is don't worry about doing the buckets and straw, just put your dunks wherever you have any water.
Yeah,
Get rid of
and-
the water when you can.
Yeah, and if you have saucers, I mean, dunks are about, I don't know, 2.5 inches around. They look like little donuts. You can crumble a dunk and put just a couple little crumbles into a number of different saucers, and it'll be good for a while. So, you don't have to use a whole dunk in a saucer. Just, crumble one up and sprinkle it into various saucers.
And another thing is just take your saucers off in the summer. I don't leave any saucers on my plants if I can help it.
Yep, yep,
So then
I
you just
agree.
have to do your ponds and
yeah.
things like
Well,
that.
if you have mosquito eaters in your pond, or you have goldfish, they can do a pretty good job controlling mosquitoes as well. I do have mosquito eaters. I have a very small pond, and I do have mosquito eaters in it, and I never have mosquitoes in there. That said, I also don't have any breeding goldfish because the mosquito eaters eat the fry of the goldfish. So, you mentioned these guys who spray for mosquitoes. And the problem is, as I mentioned with insecticides, that they're not discriminatory. They will kill everything. And frankly, I understand that if you're having a party in your yard and you have terrible mosquitoes, it may be worth having the guy come in the day before to knock them out, and then you don't have mosquitoes. But you will also be killing everybody else, because they're going to be spraying up into your trees. So let me see. Is there a good way to move spider webs and egg sacs from around house doors around the garden? Boy, I wouldn't try it. Can you move egg sacs? You might. I mean, if you're really an artiste, you might be able to take up 2 ends of that thing. And here, I no longer need to screen share. I'll stop my screen share. You may be able to, pick that string up and carefully put it up, but it needs to be pretty taut. I mean, that mother spider really adhered that thing very well to the 2 branches, and it's taut. So I think it probably needs to stay taut. You might be able to do it. I don't know. I have not tried to, but I know they get near your doors and everywhere else. Okay, I have one here. I've heard you have to clean bee houses up every year or they spread disease. I would not be surprised at all, because you get fungal stuff in there, and your varroa mites are only with honeybees, but I'm sure there are lots of other things that would get in there, which means you're going to be out there with what, a bottle brush, teeny tiny bottle brush. When would you cut back? I would cut back as soon as we get some warmer weather. And I would say for us, generally, that's probably March. If you were farther north, probably not till May or April, but I would say in March. I mean, some stuff is starting to, those basil rosettes are really starting to pop. So I think March is probably a good time. Kind of depends on the weather. Okay, here's another Amy. Talmy says that the method mentioned above is much more effective than mosquito spraying. Yes, dunks are much more effective than spraying, because as you mentioned, you're targeting the larvae. And of course, only female mosquitoes bite. So there's this great satisfaction when you smash a mosquito on your arm that you have killed a whole generation. Because she's collecting a blood meal in order to mature her eggs, in order to have to lay them. So yeah, it's very satisfying. Here's somebody says, Amy, I tried that last year. It didn't work. Oh, when should we? You want to prune trees when they're starting to break dormancy. So it depends on the tree and it depends on the year. But generally, I would say possibly February. You could do it in March. You can also prune trees up through midsummer if you need to get stuff out of the way. I mean, if you've got a branch that's sticking out and you don't want it there, prune it whenever you need to prune it. But generally, I would say spring pruning is, you want the sap to be running. You want that tree to be able to heal itself, and you don't want to use any of these tars or sealants or any of this. Let the tree do its own work on pruning. And I got another, regarding bird baths, would you replace water every day or every other day? You saw that picture of my bird bath, and basically it has a drip. So it sort of changes itself. But I would say probably once a week, I get out there with just a nylon brush and I give it a scrub just to sort of get the crud out of it. And if you're doing it once a week, in the dead of summer, you will not get any mosquitoes developing. You don't need to do it on the daily or every other day basis, unless you just are a little OCD and you want it really clean. Let's see. Sounds like Landscape Pete Olaf is really looking out for insects with his advice to leave dead stuff. Yeah, I think so. And of course, it's structural too. I mean, I think that's what he was thinking of, was that all that stuff it's better than a void. You know, that bunch of dead goldenrod is better than a nothing. So I'm not sure he was into bugs, but I think that was a good side effect. Okay, so, okay. Oh, somebody liked my bird bath. I made that. I actually have a mold I can, and it's cast in cement. I just, make this sand mold and fill it with cement. I've made a number of them now. And it used to be on the ground, but I have this puppy, and the vet said that the dog should not be drinking the bird bath water because of possible parasites. So I put it up on a log. He's now can reach the bird bath anyway. Okay, let's see. What about large logs or stumps for beneficial insects? Yes. A lot of, well, first of all, insects are really important as what's the right word? The breaker downers of everything. I mean, if we didn't have insects, we would be up to our eyeballs in no time, and our whole, nothing would decompose. Insects and fungi and bacteria are really important for that decomposition. And if you leave logs, you probably have noticed you pick it up and, oh man, you got a good colony of ants, or you get a good colony of termites. Now, I don't mind termites. I don't want them in my house, but if I've got a log out in the woods, termites are just doing their job as far as I'm concerned. So and also you get a lot of these, these wonderful passalis, the best beetles and stuff. So I leave logs. Okay, for beneficials, I'm not, mostly they're rotting, although there could be some bark that they would be able to get into. goldfinches are beautiful when they come to seed the seeds. They sure are. And echinacea is a great one for seed heads for the goldfinches. Okay. Regarding bird baths, it's also good to keep them clean, also for the health of the birds. Yes, I agree. Yeah, I do it once a week. I figured that's enough. No, I haven't seen any dead birds. Maybe they die when they're far away. So, any other questions? I enjoyed giving the talk. I learned a lot. Let's see. That's it. That's it. Just thanks. Oh, wait. Are black crickets bad for the garden? Crickets are are plant eaters. And generally, well, I let them go. I mean, I kind of like the sound of the crickets at night, but they can eat plants. So, you know, if they're a pest, I would say you might need to step up and do something. If they're not a pest, let them be. It's part of the whole cycle. I got some more. Let's see. Any other questions? No, I don't
think it's mostly thank yous, which thank you. And I also wanted to point out, I think we sent them out with the Zoom. We also sent out the information about the Ohio State University series that I feel great minds think alike. We got there first, but or maybe they did.
Yeah,
But,
Doug Ptolemy is doing it too.
well, they're doing a series of 6. They had Mary Gardner was the first week, 2 weeks ago. And then Doug Ptolemy was last week. And tomorrow is somebody talking about the wild ones.
Yeah,
Yep.
so this is the Mary Gardner, the book I recommended. That's her.
So far, Louise, you haven't either contradicted or copied what they said. I think we've got a whole lot of new information, but I think that if people want to learn more and continue exploring this, I strongly recommend that series. They had almost 10,000 people on theirs.
Wow.
But we don't have room for that many, so we're limited to 100 anyway. But yeah, it's obviously a topic that's striking a chord with many people right now. So I think we're very timely on it.
I think we should all be really concerned about the decline of insects. I mean, you know, it is a rare event now that you have to clean your windshield because of bugs. And that's very telling.
And if you want to listen to any one of, if you want to choose only one of the 6 that they're giving, and they are recording them also, they're all available online. Doug Ptolemy's is so packed. I mean, he talks about that, the insect apocalypse or whatever, but just how important caterpillars are to the whole food web, particularly birds, but and how many caterpillars it takes to feed one chickadee clutch. So this it's definitely worth continuing to explore this. So I think this is
now, are those recorded? Can you see them?
They are.
They are, okay. Speaking of chickadees, chickadees are seed eaters. A lot of birds that are seed eaters actually have to feed their young caterpillars because they can't digest the seed, and there's not as much nutrition in it. So even the seed eating birds rely on caterpillars.
So somebody asked about any thought about insects as human food source. I guess there are lots of people who do eat them, not our culture, but.
Well, there was a woman who used to be on NPR from Missoula, Montana. I don't remember her name. She was such a stitch. She was on NPR, and she would talk about eating bugs and roasting earthworms and making flour out of earthworms and this. Then I think they just finally decided it was too weird.
No, she died. I think she died. Otherwise, she would have been. I've forgotten her name.
Well, you know who I mean, though. From Missoula, Montana. Well, yeah, you're right. In our culture, people don't eat bugs now. You can go to the museum when they used to have Bug Fest, and you could eat bugs. but we don't do it much. And of course, we don't have really good bugs either. I mean, in Africa, they have bugs that are this big. So, you know, that's a meal. It's kind of crunchy meal, but it's a meal. Our bugs are smaller. Oh, here's one. Somebody sent a link about bug eating in Madagascar. Yeah.
And I think Chris recommended the exhibit at the Science Museum now.
Oh, yeah.
Exquisite Creatures, which is exquisite.
It is. It is. If you have never been impressed by beetles, you will be impressed by beetles. Oh, here's somebody growing that says there's a company in Cary growing crickets for protein powder. Well, it is. So were mealybugs. You know, crickets, beetles, you name it. We may get to that point.
If they're still around, if we don't kill them off. Well, thank you so much, Louise.
My pleasure.